I changed my mind about God. I was wrong. So accordingly, in this video, I want to share with you what I used to believe, what I believe now, and what made me change my mind along the way. And also, very importantly, I want to share with you a few thoughts of mine that I have that will help us bring more God not only into our lives, but also the world around us, which seems like it needs a lot more God right now. Because I don't know about you, but living in a world where Satan reigns and you and I and our families have to suffer the consequences doesn't really feel appealing to me. And also, quick disclaimer, this video is not intended to be a comedy video. And if that offends you, pray about it. So what I used to think about God that I now say, yeah, I was wrong about, I used to have a lot of judgment about religion and Christianity, thinking like, it's not bad, but it's like, dude, that's so outdated and like, get with it. Why are you religious when you could be spiritual? And along with that, I became very inundated in the spiritual movement. So like spirituality, not religion, like the evolved thinkers are spiritual, not religious. They're also evolved enough to always have to tell you that they're spiritual, not religious. That was me. And while I was in there, I will honestly say I got a lot of benefit from spiritual teachings, like different teachers, different books, different philosophies. I got a lot of benefit from that. But when I look back, I can see I was excluding some amazing traditional Christian values, beliefs of God and ways of connecting with God that I now really value. But out of what I would call spiritual arrogance, I was excluding them, just judging them to be, oh, that's old, outdated stuff. And like, nah, y'all need to get spiritual like me. And with that, I didn't believe in the immense power of prayer. I used to think, well, prayer's probably a good thing. It'll maybe give you a more positive mood, a more positive outlook. But I didn't truly believe in the power of prayer, where people are directly asking God for God's support and then receiving that support from God. I didn't really believe that it actually happened. And in a minute, I'll get to directly telling you what my beliefs about God now are. But first, what changed me? What happened? What I see that changed my mind? Well, one observation I've had over the past 3 years, especially, it's hashtag pandemic. Over the past 3 years, I've found myself accidentally getting more Christian. Like without even intentionally trying, like setting out on a mission, like, hey, I want to become more Christian. It's just been effortlessly happening for me. Now, I don't think I'm unique there because I've seen a lot of people and I've heard a lot of people telling me similar stories. So I asked the question, why are people getting more Christian without even trying? Here's what I believe to be true about that. The presence of evil and Satan that evil emanates from has never been more obvious, at least in my lifetime. The past 3 years, evil isn't hiding anymore. It's coming at us through authoritarianism, movements, people, groups, companies, governments, trying to invade our minds, invade our God-given free will. So as that's become more obvious, I think there's a natural polarity that happens. If you're not someone who's willing to do the devil's bidding, if you're not someone who's willing to propagate evil, then there's a natural occurrence that happens when you're in the presence of evil, you polarize to the other extreme. Like you may not even be consciously aware of it, but the presence of evil makes you lean away. And then, therefore, what direction are you leaning towards? Well, that would be the direction of God, certainly the opposite of evil, the opposite of Satan. So I think that's seeing the presence of evil. That's why I've just accidentally been getting more Christian, why so many other people are. Because right now I think the evil that's in this world is doing a great service of driving a lot of people to find God in ways that they previously hadn't. And also specifically, we could say, hey, there is an attempt to bring communism all over the world, certainly in the United States. We don't call it that, but it is that. And it's happening all over the world. And there's a reason why communists have their number one objective to disconnect people from God, where they ban religions. And of course, right now it's more like discouraging it, shaming it. But with full-on communism, they ban religion. Why is that? Because they don't want people having faith in a real higher power. So if you can get people to disconnect from God, if you get people to disconnect from the teachings of God and the ways of God, the belief in God, then those communists get to be your higher power. And honestly, they make a crappy higher power. They don't even make good fertilizer. That's not a good substitute for God. But for people who want to control you, which is what evil is, anytime someone tries to control you in a way that's not in your best interest, that's what I call evil. So for the force of evil, that is communism, wanting to control you, they realize people who have a faith in a real higher power, God, they're not controllable. So we have to become their higher power. We need them to depend on us, not depending on their faith in God, but that we need them to depend on us, need us, be obedient to us, or else communism just doesn't work. And even when that happens, it still doesn't work, but nonetheless. Now, there's a lot I don't know, but one thing I do know is when you have faith in God, you are not controllable. You're not. The fear-mongering, the fear of death that ultimately all fear-mongering points to, like, hey, the climate's changing, the climate's gonna kill you. Hey, look at this disease, look at the death toll on the bottom of CNN. All that fear-mongering really preys on the fear of death that people have. But here's the deal. When you believe in God, you also therefore believe in the afterlife. You believe in heaven. So you don't really fear death the way you fear death if you believe there is no God. Why? Because you're like, well, okay, if I die, which I don't want to, but if I do, okay, I'm in heaven. That's actually beautiful. So the brave, bold freedom statement of it's better to die on your feet than live on your knees becomes something that people of faith will live by. That's why communists, globalists, anyone who wants to control you purposely tries to disconnect you from God, because God's way is freedom. Evil constricts, God frees. God gives us free will. That's our expression of freedom. That's God's way. Communists don't like that. Globalists don't like that, because God's way makes you uncontrollable to them. And we can see that tyrannical authoritarians attempt to disconnect people from their faith in God. It's certainly at play now. Now, statistically, 50 years ago, 98% of Americans believed in God. Today, statistically, just 81% of Americans believe in God. And then from a political perspective, it's actually interesting to see that just 64% of Democrats believe in God, while 92% of Republicans believe in God. And of course, right now, as it stands, the evil, the satanic ways, the communist ways tend to be much more abundant on the Democrat side. So it's not too surprising that just 62% of Democrats believe in God. And specifically, we see the coercion to disconnect people from God playing out in all kinds of propaganda. The gender ideology propaganda, where they're attempting to get people to believe that God made mistakes, which is a fascinating way to basically get people to not believe in God, because if you believe in God, you probably believe God doesn't make too many mistakes. Like, hey, look at this junk between my legs. I'm the wrong gender. So they try to teach us your mind, what you want. You are right, God's wrong. God made a mistake. Dude, you're totally right about you should be a woman. God made a mistake. So, there probably is no God. But when we see all this gender ideology stuff that hinges on that principle that if there probably was a God, he wouldn't be screwing up your gender now, would he? We see that coming at our kids all the time. And amongst other devious intentions behind that kind of ideology, I believe one of the principal ones at its core is to disconnect people from their faith in God. So here's what I believe now. I now look at traditional Christian values with a lot of respect and reverence, and I'm integrating those more into my life. I will make no claims that I'm the world's best Christian or most devoted Christian, but I'm looking at these Christian values and they make way more sense to me now than they previously did. Christian values around faith in God. Christian values around family first. And I now believe that the power of prayer is the most important thing you and I can do. I believe prayer is powerful. I believe prayer brings about change. I believe prayer brings God into a place where God is needed, where God has been absent of, where the evil has starved out the oxygen of God. I think we need more prayer. Now, I don't know for sure. Here's how I look at prayer. You just imagine you're in an underwater submarine as opposed to the above water submarines. But nonetheless, you're underwater in a submarine and you've got a limited oxygen supply. When oxygen starts running out, you're in trouble. And you look around the world today, people are in trouble. They really are. So what can you do? You need this oxygen. It's your life force. So, okay, we got to bring oxygen from the surface down to us here in this little submarine where we're at. How are we going to do it? Well, if you're in a submarine, some kind of tube system going up to the surface that pumps down oxygen into the submarine where it's needed. That's what you got to do. And I think prayer works in a similar way, where you look at where prayer is needed, God's will is needed. It's absent of God. Whether it's like, hey, the World Economic Forum or political prisoners from January 6th, or children in public schools, or individual situations you or I might be in. We need God, we need blessings, we need support. How are we gonna get it? So cool, we're in the submarine. I believe prayer becomes the tube that channels the oxygen of God down to us. So it's like, God's there, but we got to bring God into this situation. So I think when we're in a prayerful state of mind, we're opening up a channel to bring God where God is needed. And how the system tends to be set up, the way I believe God set it up, is we have free will, which means God loves us enough to function disconnected from God, if that's our choice, where we can bring God into this situation. So I believe when we pray, we're opening up a tube to directly connect from God and bring God into the space over which we're praying. We're bringing oxygen where it's needed. Sounds kind of artsy-fartsy. Obviously, that's not scientifically true, but maybe it's metaphorically true. But nonetheless, I now view prayer as essential. It's what we need, and that's how I think it works. And get this, right now, I think we're at a time of spiritual warfare. We look at what's going on in the world, conflict between different nations, division all over the place. We want to teach this to your kids. It's like, you seem kind of satanic. Well, that's because I think they are. So even though we see these literal things playing out at the physical level, I think what we're seeing is symptoms of what's happening at more of a metaphysical level. I think right now, Satan and God are at war. In a time of spiritual warfare, what's on the line is you and I, our souls, our children. One side wants to control us, the other side wants to free us. And I think what we do in our day-to-day lives, our actions, our thoughts, our words, is determining which side of the spiritual warfare we're fighting on. Oh, side note, I want to be honest about this. I used to have shame about saying the word God. Back when I thought like, dude, I'm spiritual, I'm so cool, but not religious. I used to have shame about using the word God, and instead I'd say, the universe, or the all-knowing. I'd just create different names, but I actually just meant God. So I'm delighted to say now I have not only no shame about saying God, but I actually have joy in saying God. God. Yeah, that felt pretty good. And then before I share a little perspective on what I think you and I can do to bring more God into our lives and the world around us, I want to do a quick disclaimer because it's something that tripped me up and gave me a negative view about Christianity and God itself. I would look at all the scandals that have happened in the name of religion. I mean, so many wars have been fought based on religion, based on God. There's been so many corrupt scandals. I mean, so many church scandals where it's all about the money. And then, of course, sexual abuse scandals in the Catholic Church. So I would kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, like, oh, dude, that dirty bathwater. Yeah, if that's what Christianity is, screw that. If that's what God is, screw that. Now I have a much more mature look where I do believe evil goes wherever it can. The devil masquerades as an angel of disguise. So if the devil wants to control people, then a good way for the devil to do that is to find people where they're trying to find God. So I think we certainly need good discernment. And just because something claims to be of God, or a church or a person claims to be of God, I think we need discernment because the devil masquerades as an angel of light. But now what I think is a more mature view, I will discern evil from churches, discern evil from God. So I don't have to throw the God baby out with the bathwater, but rather just throw the bathwater out and keep the God, which seems to be much more empowering. So here are 4 things that I think you and I can do to bring more God into the world. One is to very intentionally have faith in God. It's hard to allow yourself to be supported by God if you don't believe in God, if you don't actively think about it. But having faith that there is a God, God has our backs, God has a plan, and our job is to be of best service to that plan as possible. So having faith, and then listen. It's one thing to have faith, then it's another thing to listen to God. Because I don't know about you, I've got noise in my mind all the time. I've got my own thoughts, I've got my own ego. Then of course there's all the outside noise coming in. So to be guided by God, I think we need to become very good listeners. What is God's path for me? What's God's encouragement for me? What step am I being guided to take right now in this difficult situation? We've got to learn to listen. And I think listening to God, it's a little bit less to do with our eardrums and much more to do with hearing God from our heart. And at least for me, how the conversation tends to show up is subtle feelings in my heart. When I'm thinking about doing something, oftentimes for me, it's as simple as a sensation of lightness in my heart when it's in my greater good. Or it might be a choice where like, dude, that makes logical sense for me to do, but my heart will have a sense of heaviness to it. It's very subtle and it's very easy for it to be there, but for me not to notice. That's why I find it essential to calm my mind and listen to the sensations of my heart, because I do believe that's how God communicates with us. I think if we're trying to listen to God in the English language and literal words, we're probably going to be waiting a while. Now, if that's how God talks to you, great. Doesn't seem to be how God talks to me or most people. So we got to listen to our heart, because what we're really listening to is who's on the other side of our heart, which I believe is God. And thirdly, about what you and I can do is pray. Pray often. Know when people are in need. Maybe you don't even know them, but pray for them. Pray for yourself. Pray for your family, your circumstances. Pray for other people. Pray for the world at large. And by the way, this might sound weird, but when we look at the evil authoritarians, people I judge to be evil at least, the Klaus Schwabs, the George Soroses, Bill Gates, Biden, Trudeau, it's not that I'm keeping track of who they are, but that's who I think they are. What would happen if we start praying for them? Certainly not praying for their agenda to succeed, but praying for them as the individuals. Because I look at them and what I see is godless people who are driven by their own ego. And I think evil is controlling their ego. So these are maybe people we need to pray for more than anybody else, to have them saved. And by the way, the more they're saved, the more they get God into their lives, which I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But hypothetically, if they got more God into their lives, we save them, kind of saves us too, doesn't it? And fourthly, about what I think you and I can do is doing our best to live a life of service. A service to God's plan, a service to God's guidance for us. And then we also have to realize to do so, to live a life of service, we have to look at our own egotistical wants, our egotistical desires. They even might be authentic desires, but sometimes we have to be willing to abandon those in order to be of service to God. Now, here's a fact. A lot of people would say, dude, you mean not just dedicating my life to, me and serving myself, which is kind of narcissism, but how would I ever be happy if I don't do that? Well, I would say, how would you ever be happy if that's all you do? I believe true happiness, fulfillment, and meaning of life absolutely requires us to be of service to a greater good, to contribute to the greater good of other people. I think that is absolutely what's required for us to be happy and fulfilled individuals. Now, not to be confused with the dopamine hits that happen when we gratify ourselves, when we make ourselves feel more significant and certain and in control by just kind of going after our egotistical wants, needs, and desires. We love those dopamine hits. They feel good. They're instant gratification. But that's not happiness. A life of service is what births true happiness. And I think to be of best service to a will greater than ours, we need to think about three things: our thoughts, words, and actions, and what are they aligned with? If we allow our thoughts, words, and actions to be as impeccably aligned as possible with God's guidance, then I think we're doing really well. That means we're someone, we listen, we have faith, we listen, we pray, but we also move our feet. We take action. We take action with our words, our thoughts, and of course then our outward actions. That makes us a three-dimensional being doing our best to act out God's will, being of service. I don't know about you, but I think the world needs a lot more of that. But that's something within our control. We'll never be perfect at, but it's within our control to do our best to be better at, a little better each day. So that's a little rundown on what I used to believe about God, what I believe now, what changed my mind, and what I think you and I can do to bring more God into our lives. Now, just a quick PS on this. One of the reasons why I like sharing thoughts on what I changed my mind about out loud is I think we live in a world where we're discouraged from changing our mind. But it's like frowned upon to change your mind. Well, what if we learn to frown upon never changing our mind and give ourselves impeccable permission to change our minds? Because if you never change your mind, guess what? You're not growing, you're not learning, you are what's called staying stuck in the same beliefs and practices that you adopted a long time ago, and they might be well expired, kind of like meat in your refrigerator you bought 7 years ago. Yeah, you bought it 7 years ago, but it might be rotten. It might be time to throw it out and replace it with something new. So personally, I'm someone who encourages people to change their mind. I think I just like to model that for you. Not that I'm picture perfect model for it, but I'm clumsy, stumbling my way along. And I think it's great to change our mind when we have a good reason to change our mind. When we look at something we used to believe, my old beliefs about God, and then a better way comes along. We let the old one go and embrace the new. And with that, with the 4 tips I shared about having faith, listening, praying, and living a life of service, if there's anything in there that you can get benefit from, awesome, please take it. I appreciate you, my beautiful freedom-loving friend. Thank you for watching this video with me, and I'll see you soon.